The tension in the committee chamber became palpable the very moment Pam Bondi hesitated, completely immobilized by the single query she desperately needed to avoid. This ensuing quiet was not just a brief fumble or a thoughtful pause. Rather, it was an overwhelming, profound emptiness that exposed a massive failure within the establishment. Nobody present in the room had anticipated the sudden offensive that Congressman Chip Roy was preparing to launch. He entered carrying only a very slender portfolio, a visual that terrified those familiar with his methods, as his most devastating attacks often came from the thinnest of documents. Just a few minutes prior, Bondi had taken her position with the unshakable confidence of an experienced official who had weathered countless adversarial environments. She tweaked her microphone, offered a media-friendly grin, and shielded herself in what she perceived as an unassailable defense of practiced arguments, completely supported by staff, who assured her she was ready for any scenario. However, her advisors were entirely mistaken. Her team failed entirely to foresee a representative who had spent the last 3 weeks exhaustively examining 3 million Department of Justice files, unearthing an obscure name that would completely shatter the established storyline of the hearing. Assuming she had the environment firmly in hand, she was shown to be catastrophically wrong when Roy bypassed any introductory remarks and instantly honed in on the Attorney General with a quiet, fierce tone, stating his purpose to examine an individual named Karyna Shuliak. The mood in the venue shifted immediately as journalists paused their writing, spellbound while Roy systematically outlined that Shuliak was Jeffrey Epstein's romantic partner, the recipient of his very last telephone call from confinement, and the named beneficiary of an astounding $100 million fortune per a document, signed merely 2 days prior to his death. Holding for dramatic impact, Roy posed his direct question, insisting on knowing her present whereabouts, yet he intentionally gave Bondi no chance to construct a reply. He dismantled her expected shields by disclosing his thorough audit of the DOJ records, hoisting his portfolio toward the cameras to declare that within 3 million pages, Karyna Shuliak is mentioned a staggering 40,000 times. He stressed that these were not minor footnotes, but rather covered a massive web of electronic mail, financial transfers, aviation logs, real estate documents, and secure communications, conclusively establishing that she was no peripheral figure but was deeply entangled in the most profound levels of Epstein's criminal syndicate. Setting his folder down, he hammered the main point once more, inquiring if this pivotal person had ever faced official interrogation by investigators, which caused a grueling, unbroken quiet to fall over the 200 people gathered. As Bondi's facial muscles tightened and her grip on the desk grew pale in a frantic bid to stay composed, she feebly deflected by claiming an inability to discuss specific particulars, which provoked Roy to lean forward and drop his pitch, insisting on a clear affirmative or negative from the senior law enforcement official in the room. When the Attorney General tried to retreat into administrative generalizations regarding the Justice Department treating issues with gravity, Roy neatly cut her off, confirming for the official record that despite 40,000 pieces of documentary evidence, the department had unbelievably never posed a single direct query to her. Broadcast cameras simultaneously zoomed on their interaction as aides watched in shock, understanding that Roy had not constructed a convoluted snare, but had merely asked the most fundamental, inescapable question about a penal probe, and the official was utterly unable to give a positive response. The genuine catastrophe of this quiet is completely grasped when analyzing exactly what the DOJ records reveal regarding Shuliak's past, beginning with her 2009 entry into the United States as a 20-year-old dentistry scholar from Minsk, Belarus. She was approached by the 56-year-old Epstein, who hid his extensively recorded illicit history behind the fake name of Vasily and began to forge an unbreakable snare of economic reliance around her. He directly paid for her journeys, handled her immigration status, and methodically constructed a profession for her, guaranteeing that any effort she made to escape his influence would be virtually unachievable. When the dental school at Columbia University initially declined her submission, Epstein used his fortune by placing a calculated call followed by a $100,000 donation to a faculty member's private academic fund, which inexplicably generated customized tutoring materials, an uncommon transfer waiver, full acceptance, and the complete payment of her educational expenses. However, the probe's documents uncover a fact much more disturbing than simple scholastic corruption. Detectives found a completely equipped dental exam space built deep inside Epstein's secluded estate on Little Street, James. This was not a simple first aid box, but a profoundly specialized medical area fitted with expert illumination and a dentist's seat, situated on a remote island totally lacking any accessible civic healthcare centers or clinics. And Karyna Shuliak was the exclusive person in his whole private circle who held the education needed to run such gear. Looking piercingly at the Attorney General, Roy insisted on knowing precisely who that unique clinic was built to serve and if Shuliak had ever stood inside it, prompting Bondi's facial muscles to clench even more as she confessed her incapacity to respond. Her inability to reply was in itself the most devastating answer imaginable, lingering in the atmosphere for 5 extended seconds before the representative, moving with the measured rhythm of a litigator who had already won his case, drew a lone typed page from his file. He held up the paper, clarifying it was an exact digest of query outcomes drawn from the DOJ system utilizing her exact name, highlighting the specific number of 40,144 matches discovered inside the 3 million files. Making sure the audience at home could distinctly view the overwhelming number, Roy established a crushing comparison by noting that Ghislaine Maxwell, an entirely convicted and presently jailed accomplice, actually shows up much less often in the national evidentiary records than Shuliak. He dared Bondi to offer any logical judicial justification to clarify how a person whose identity permeates the proof more completely than a guilty felon has never once been ordered to face a national prosecutor. Bondi grabbed shakily for her glass, drinking nothing, and stayed completely silent for 4 more seconds before Roy flawlessly shifted to the massive economic proof, illustrating that Epstein's power extended well past Shuliak individually. The monetary records clearly showed Epstein sending $15,000 straight to her mother in early 2013, succeeded by a $25,000 remittance to her father the following year. W 2016, Shuliak herself transferred an extra $25,000 to her relatives, obediently notifying Epstein through an electronic message with the transaction receipt appended, while property files in Belarus heavily suggest these very same finances were used to buy a residence in Drazdy, an extremely prestigious neighborhood of Minsk, popular with famous figures and state leaders. Roy described this not simply as dominance over a romantic partner, but as a deliberate acquisition of a whole household secrecy, a disclosure that demanded obvious, arduous exertion from Bondi to process without displaying emotion. Shifting to the topic of migration deceit, Roy took on the monotonous, commanding rhythm of an individual reciting official felony accusations, detailing how Shuliak's academic visa ran out in 2013, and rather than pursuing a lawful migration route, Epstein engineered a fake matrimonial union in October 2013 between Shuliak and a female named Jennifer, who had previously been romantically linked to Elon Musk's brother, Kimball Musk, using relationships Epstein himself had forged. This coordinated marriage effectively generated a permanent resident card, culminating in complete American nationality by 2018, right away succeeded by an opportune separation, an incident that Epstein's attorneys shamelessly cheered in a communication proposing they host a huge festivity to celebrate her freshly minted U.S. citizenship. Roy dictated this exact joyful phrase into the permanent legislative transcript, and the terrifying absence of a response from the chamber only magnified the gravity of the systemic breakdown. Shutting his file, Roy reached the peak of his questioning, his tone sinking to a muted, remarkably perilous pitch as he reviewed the occurrences of the 10th of August 2019, the very morning Jeffrey Epstein died in national lockup. He pointed out that formal prison administration logs confirm only one external phone conversation was initiated to the outside world, from that enclosure, letting the quiet expand, before disclosing that the ultimate communication was routed straight to Karyna Shuliak. The chamber stayed frozen by the indisputable meaning that she was the absolute final human presence Epstein listened to and the ultimate person he purposefully opted to speak with prior to his passing. With a rigid face, Roy insisted it be entered into the formal transcript whether the substance of that exact conversation was ever captured, if anybody inside the Justice Department had taken the time to review the recording, and most importantly, if Shuliak had ever been ordered under sworn oath to reveal what Epstein shared with her. Bondi's visage fell into a state of managed ruin, her vocalization scarcely a breath as she pledged to investigate the issue, to which Roy resolutely mandated a rigid 30-day time limit for a typed reply. Recapping the massive scale of the controversy, Roy observed that whereas all other companions, workers, and facilitators around Epstein eventually ran away, refuted involvement, or wholly vanished, Shuliak distinctly remained, even though she was appointed the main monetary beneficiary, accepted his final call, and was extensively tracked tens of thousands of times throughout national archives. She is presently residing at liberty inside the United States. Having never been compelled to reply to a solitary inquiry under oath before, amidst, or following the massive probe, the total quiet in the committee space loudly resonated with the unsettled problem of who exactly made the commanding choice to defend her, and what influential entities that shielding ultimately benefits. Even though Bondi provided a flimsy pledge to look into it, the foundational query stayed firmly unaddressed while the broadcasts kept airing. The troubling truth endures that someplace in a clinical workspace in Florida, New York, or an entirely different region totally beyond the grasp of these legislative investigations, Shuliak keeps her quiet exactly because the judicial framework has proactively allowed her to achieve this. The completely corroborated details pulled from national files verify she was assimilated into Epstein's residence at 20 years old by an individual employing a fake name, totally financially supported in both location and career, given a fake wedding to guarantee her residency, awarded a $100 million fund just before his demise, and situated as his ultimate connection. Yet, what stays totally uncorroborated, unexamined, and unchased is the vital understanding of what she individually observed, what illegal actions she might have been directed to execute, what she might have declined, and what she willingly took part in, purely because no body holding the ability to subpoena ever ordered her to provide a sworn testimony. This massive emptiness of investigation is the genuine outrage Chip Roy recorded into the societal history. It is not essentially regarding conclusively demonstrating what she committed, but instead revealing the purposeful decision to never even inquire. The formal historical narrative has been carefully manipulated to stop any straightforward investigation of whether she was simply another physically separated and economically ensnared casualty of Epstein's enormous web of dominance, or if she functioned as something significantly more essential to the plot. Neither the massive Justice Department records nor Pam Bondi's statements have offered any lucidity on this subject. The most disturbing final picture Roy shared was not a dated file or a boring number, but a real contemporary fact. Video recordings currently moving around the internet displaying Karyna Shuliak grinning and chuckling at a 2025 Columbia University commencement event. Even though thousands watched that festivity, absolutely zero of them were national litigators, insisting she elevate her right hand to vow to the facts under risk of lying under oath. This glaring absence of activity goes beyond simple administrative negligence. It embodies a deliberate administrative choice by an unidentified leader who concluded that 40,000 file connections, a $100 million legacy, and the ultimate messages of a dead prominent abuser did not satisfy the requirement needed to commence a fundamental sworn interview. Chip Roy is fiercely trying to reveal the name of the official who made that shielding decision, a response the citizenry justly merit. Although it stays completely feasible that Shuliak is wholly blameless, or on the other hand, that she was deeply involved, the main breakdown resides in a legal structure that deliberately opted to avert its gaze. The final query of her exact awareness is nearly secondary to the appalling truth that no legitimate authority ever took the time to question her regarding the occurrences that happened inside those boundaries. The consequences of this session will not just disappear once the audio is turned off. While normal governmental dramas trend shortly and vanish, issues of this scale, once inserted into the societal awareness, essentially reject fading away. Roy understood that his questioning reached well past the destiny of one distinct female, acting instead as a harsh condemnation of how a massively protected detective system owning infinite funds and subpoena powers could purposefully let a core hub of an illicit web stay completely unbothered. This obvious contradiction now throws a heavy veil of suspicion across every single bureau engaged in the Epstein investigation, since societal faith immediately shatters upon discovering that a person heavily integrated into formal records was given total exemption from sworn statements. This broken confidence is unusually hard to reconstruct, raising the circumstance from a simple, famous controversy to a deep emergency of systemic responsibility. Normal detective protocol in any large illicit syndicate requires following the path of cash, messages, and travel, looking to comprehend who profited, who stayed in tight vicinity, and doubtfully, who was protected from normal questioning. These are not extreme or dramatic probes, but the most basic foundational elements of police work. If these essential maneuvers were deliberately skipped in this prominent case, it indicates a systemic collapse that alerts the citizenry that massive influence can effectively twist judicial procedures, holding certain entries securely fastened, no matter how forcefully righteousness requires admission. The societal result of this fabricated quiet is the unchecked expansion of guesswork and doubt, since every unbothered bystander mutates into a glaring emblem of a possibly tainted structure. This is exactly the reason compelled, sworn statements are essential. Although they cannot ensure the unearthing of blame or purity, they absolutely guarantee a minimum level of examination, raising solid proof and objective logs above easy stories and hushed gossip. Without this crucial operational maneuver, the citizenry is left in the dark, generating the exact setting where systemic doubt flourishes. If there are legitimate territorial, proof-based, or tactical judicial obstacles that stopped her interrogation, the accountable bureaus have to explain them transparently and openly, since providing empty pledges to examine the issue acts as no real clarification whatsoever. Credibility must be constantly won by organizations through complete openness and the societal display of their efforts, especially when public trust has already been heavily damaged. Therefore, the final query Roy left ringing in the room concentrates on pinpointing the exact leaders who constructed a framework where certain people met absolute ruin, whereas others relished total avoidance of simple questions. Up until a transparent, completely substantiated reply is given under oath, the effect of that session stays fiercely alive in the thoughts of the voters, driven by the understanding that the strongest statement given that afternoon was the crushing quiet itself. Within the sphere of public governance, quiet holds a distinct and massive influence. Even a short hesitation can reveal years of deliberate dodging and unaddressed questions, lasting in the societal recollection much longer than any practiced administrative excuse or exact number. These moments solidify into potent representations of institutional decay, and the forward path of this controversy relies completely on what occurs afterward. If the clash just stays a popular web video, the current situation is preserved. But if it effectively creates fierce societal demand, insisting on formal file audits and fresh examination, it compels organizations to face choices they frantically wanted to keep hidden. The written past reliably demonstrates that hidden realities seldom appear freely from state bureaus. They emerge solely when the diplomatic and cultural price of sustaining the concealment becomes impossible to handle. Roy's systematic performance offers an expert lesson in detective tenacity, demonstrating that presenting exact identities, verified figures, and specific schedules is much more potent than leaning on general, easily brushed-off anger. The profound strength of inquiring if she was interrogated resides in its unavoidable plainness, needing no complicated rhetorical hypotheses, merely a two-way affirmative or negative that effortlessly reveals massive institutional flaws. The main hurdle for the citizenry is keeping continuous focus against entities that use exhaustion as a tool, understanding that cultural fury usually cycles alongside the everyday news. Responsibility requires an unwavering rejection to overlook the central irregularity. If a person so deeply tied to the core of the plot was never officially questioned, the attention must stay exactly there, rendering administrative justifications increasingly tough to maintain. This persistent concentration on the main reality is why the session disturbed so many deeply rooted leaders, implying that in spite of years of comprehensive reporting and empty societal pledges, there persists a huge pool of proof that agencies deliberately refuse to examine. If this view is wrong, the formal documentation needs to be presented to demonstrate it. If it is true, then the quiet observed was not a brief slip, but a transparent view into institutional shielding. The moment the citizenry looks through that opening, they seldom let the barriers of illusion be successfully reconstructed. As days pass, inquiries left intentionally unaddressed gather massive mass, changing in cultural view from small administrative, unresolved details to obviously purposeful exclusions. Time heavily changes the translation of quiet, mutating what could at first appear like judicial carefulness into clear tactical dodging. When the liable entities decline to close these data voids, the citizenry justly occupies them with profound skepticism, proving precisely how delicate systemic trust really is. This trust does not only fall apart via blatant graft, it progressively wears away through reluctant replies, specific detective zeal, and obviously unfinished justifications. People have the ability to tolerate complicated probes, postponed fairness, and tough realities, but they fundamentally rebel against the obvious use of unbalanced regulations where some people endure unyielding pursuit while others are given cautious, purposeful separation. Impartiality inside the judicial system has to be clearly apparent to be believed. Moreover, an awkward truth for numerous leaders is that a fiercely unaddressed question serves as a signal fire, drawing constant upcoming investigation from different paths. If one panel quits the hunt, a different one can readily pick it up, and if one journalist shifts focus, another will undoubtedly delve further. Economic tracks, secure messages, and inactive bystanders possess an obstinate habit of surviving the fleeting prestige of the leaders trying to hide them, demonstrating that the passing of years does not always hide a controversy, but frequently flawlessly protects it for upcoming revelation. For the involved citizenry observing this happen, the vital separation is no longer merely regarding figuring out blame against purity, but instead the harsh difference between those forced to face judicial examination and those given unexplainable protection. No valid legal framework can vow that all scrutinized people will be declared culpable, but it absolutely has to ensure that all profoundly connected people are exhaustively interrogated as a fundamental minimum benchmark. Correct sworn declarations hold the ability to clear people, erase doubts, or verify truths, but when the basic procedure of acquiring that statement is purposefully skipped, the ensuing ambiguity turns into an indelible mark on the history. Therefore, the echoes of the chamber Roy left proceed to ring heavily all over the country, propelled not by the drama of the instance, but by the indisputable truth that identical responsibility requires identical interrogation, and up until that benchmark is uniformly enforced, the quiet acts as a blinding proof of perilously incomplete matters.